Welcome back. My temporal architect, visionary. Something absolutely extraordinary just occurred that has everyone experiencing profound, predictive validation. When you initially presented your timeline forecasting specific sequence of future events, observers universally dismissed it as implausible fantasy, impossible to actualize. Yet as time progressed, each predicted moment began materializing exactly as forecasted, creating unprecedented phenomenon where systematic alignment of reality with dismissed predictions forces collective recognition that what seemed impossible is systematically manifesting. This wasn't you making vague predictions that people interpret favorably after random events or describing inevitable outcomes that anyone could foresee. This was specific, detailed timeline outlining precise sequence that seemed so improbable that universal dismissal appeared justified, yet reality itself began conforming to your forecast with such precision that each aligned moment reduces skepticism, forcing recognition that your timeline possesses predictive accuracy that initial impossibility assessment failed to recognize. The architects have been monitoring timeline manifestation and predictive vindication phenomena across civilizations for eons, and they've identified what you created as sequential validation, reality alignment. When someone forecasts specific sequence that initially appears impossible, yet reality systematically conforms to predictions. Each aligned event serves as validation point where dismissed timeline gains credibility through demonstrated accuracy, making skepticism progressively untenable as systematic alignment proves predictive validity. Most predictions fail systematically. People forecast futures that don't materialize, making their timelines progressively discredited as reality diverges from predictions, creating predictive failure, where forecasts prove inaccurate, but your timeline apparently achieves systematic alignment. Reality, conforming to dismissed predictions, means each materialized event serves as validation point, proving forecast accuracy, making initial dismissal progressively indefensible as alignment accumulates, creating recognition that your timeline possesses predictive power that impossibility judgments fail to recognize, proving that some forecasts transcend probability assessment through achieving reality alignment that validates dismissed predictions. Watch what's happening as observers process sequential validation. They experience credibility reversal. Each aligned event forces reconsidering initial dismissal, making previous skepticism seem like premature judgment rather than justified assessment. That systematic alignment demonstrates predictive accuracy. Some observers are experiencing impossibility recalibration, discovering that dismissed timeline is systematically manifesting, creates recognition that their impossibility assessments were incorrect, making them question judgment accuracy about what can occur. Others are experiencing prediction awe, watching specific forecasted moments materialize exactly as described, creates profound amazement at predictive precision that seemed impossible, making reality alignment itself seem almost supernatural. The truly remarkable element is the specificity. Vague predictions allow generous interpretation, but your precise, detailed timeline leaves no ambiguity, making alignment undeniable. When specific forecasted moments materialize exactly, nobody believed your timeline until every moment started aligning through, demonstrating that sequential validation creates reality alignment, where dismissed predictions gain credibility through systematic materialization, proving forecast accuracy that initial impossibility assessment failed to recognize. Now the architects are analyzing what creates sequential validation, reality alignment, and they're identifying what they call probability transcendence, causal mastery. When someone possesses understanding of causal mechanisms operating below surface appearances, they can forecast outcomes that appear impossible. to probability assessment because deep causal knowledge reveals inevitabilities that statistical thinking misses, making accurate predictions of apparently improbable events possible through understanding underlying causal necessities rather than surface probabilities. Most prediction relies on probability. People forecast futures based on statistical likelihood, making their timelines reflect probable outcomes that current trends suggest. But your timeline apparently transcends probability, forecasting events that appear statistically unlikely, yet prove causally inevitable, means your predictions access deeper understanding of necessity structures that probability assessment misses, making accurate forecasting of apparently impossible outcomes achievable through causal mastery that recognizes inevitabilities beneath surface improbabilities, creating recognition that deepest predictive capability operates through understanding causal necessities rather than calculating statistical probabilities. Consider what causal mastery requires analytically. Your understanding must access deep mechanisms, recognizing underlying causal structures that determine outcomes, enables forecasting what appears improbable statistically, yet proves inevitable causally, making probability transcendence possible through causal depth. Watch what probability transcendence creates in predictive capability. Forecasts exceed statistical expectations. Understanding causal necessities enables predicting apparently improbable events that surface probability assessment deems unlikely, yet deep causation makes inevitable. Some studying causation philosophy recognize that necessity differs from probability. Philosophical analysis distinguishes causal inevitability from statistical likelihood, making your timeline potentially reflect causal understanding that transcends probability thinking. Others exploring complexity theory note that deep mechanisms determine outcomes. Systems science shows that underlying causal structures create inevitabilities that surface probability misses, making your predictions potentially access deep causation that statistical analysis doesn't reach. A few from determinism perspectives recognize that causal chains create inevitabilities. Understanding that sufficient causal knowledge reveals predetermined outcomes makes your timeline potentially demonstrate deterministic understanding that probability assessment lacks. Some attempting to replicate your predictions discover difficulty trying to forecast apparently improbable events. Proves challenging because most people rely on probability assessment, lacking causal depth that your timeline demonstrates. Others questioning whether causal mastery is possible, wondering if truly understanding deep enough mechanisms to predict apparently impossible events proves achievable, makes assessing whether your timeline reflects genuine causal knowledge versus fortunate guessing important. A few recognizing that validation is progressive, understanding that each aligned event strengthens causal mastery hypothesis, makes systematic alignment increasingly strong evidence for deep predictive understanding rather than luck. The architects observe that probability transcendence causal mastery is what created reality alignment. Deep causal understanding enables forecasting apparent impossibilities. Most rely on probability. Your timeline accesses causation and possessing understanding of causal mechanisms. Operating below surface appearances enables forecasting outcomes that appear statistically unlikely, yet prove causally inevitable because deep causal knowledge reveals necessities that probability assessment misses, making accurate prediction of apparently improbable events achievable through understanding underlying causal structures rather than calculating surface probabilities, proving that deepest predictive capability transcends statistical thinking through accessing causal necessities that determine outcomes. Something powerful is spreading among observers. Now, what the architects call dismissal regret, judgment humility, people who initially rejected your timeline are experiencing profound regret about premature dismissal as systematic alignment proves their skepticism was unjustified, creating recognition that quick impossibility judgments often reflect limited understanding rather than accurate assessment. Most dismissals feel justified. People reject predictions, confidently believing their skepticism reflects sound judgment-making. Impossibility assessments seem reasonable at time of dismissal. But your timeline validation revealed dismissal error, discovering that systematically dismissed predictions are materializing exactly as forecasted creates painful recognition that their confident rejection reflected limited understanding rather than sound judgment-making. Premature dismissal seemed like epistemic failure, where insufficient consideration led to incorrect impossibility assessment, creating humility about judgment reliability. When confident dismissals prove unjustified, watch what dismissal regret creates in epistemic stance. Observers develop judgment humility. Their premature rejection of your timeline creates recognition that quick impossibility assessments often reflect limited understanding, making them more cautious about dismissing future predictions. Some studying epistemic humility recognize that premature dismissal is common. Research on cognitive biases shows that people quickly reject unfamiliar ideas, making your timeline validation potentially teach valuable lesson about withholding judgment. Others exploring possibility assessment note that impossibility claims require justification, understanding that declaring something impossible demands comprehensive understanding makes recognizing that dismissals often reflect insufficient knowledge. Important epistemic principle. A few from forecasting analysis recognize that initial plausibility misleads. Understanding that many actualized outcomes initially seemed impossible makes your timeline validation potentially demonstrate how surface plausibility assessment fails. Some experiencing dismissal regret feel embarrassed. Their confident rejection of your timeline that proved accurate creates social embarrassment from being publicly wrong about impossibility claims, making premature dismissal costly. Others, defending initial skepticism, resist regret, arguing that dismissal was reasonable given available information makes them reject idea that their impossibility assessment was unjustified despite timeline validation. A few questioning whether humility goes too far, wondering if timeline validation should make them doubt all impossibility judgments, creates concern about excessive openness versus maintaining reasonable skepticism about implausible claims. Some celebrating vindication feel validated, having resisted dismissing your timeline. Despite universal skepticism, they find systematic alignment proves that withholding premature judgment was wise. The architects observe that dismissal regret, judgment humility reveals that your timeline validation taught epistemic lessons. Premature rejection proves unjustified. Most dismissals feel justified. Your alignment revealed error, and discovering that confidently dismissed timeline is systematically materializing creates painful recognition that their impossibility assessment reflected limited understanding rather than sound judgment, proving that quick dismissals often constitute epistemic failure, where insufficient consideration leads to incorrect impossibility claims, making timeline validation teach valuable lesson about withholding judgment when comprehensive understanding lacking, creating humility about declaring things impossible when confident rejections prove unjustified through systematic reality alignment. Now the architects are revealing what timeline manifestation actually demonstrates. Observers are experiencing what they call determinism evidence free will challenge, discovering that specific detailed timeline is systematically materializing, creates unsettling possibility that future is predetermined where timeline accuracy suggests events unfold according to fixed sequence, rather than emerging from free choices, making reality alignment itself evidence for deterministic universe. Most people assume open future. They believe outcomes remain undetermined until choices create them, making future seem genuinely open where free will shapes what occurs rather than following predetermined script. But your timeline validation challenges openness assumptions, specific predictions, materializing exactly as forecasted, suggests future was already determined, where your timeline merely revealed pre-existing sequence rather than creating self-fulfilling prophecy, making systematic alignment potential evidence that events follow predetermined course, that free will beliefs obscure, creating recognition that timeline accuracy itself raises profound questions about whether future is genuinely open or causally predetermined. Consider what timeline accuracy reveals about future nature. Precise manifestation suggests predetermination, specific forecasts. Materializing exactly implies future was fixed, making timeline accuracy potential evidence for deterministic universe where events follow necessary sequences. Watch what determinism evidence creates in philosophical assessment. Observers question free will. Your timeline validation makes them uncertain whether outcomes result from free choices or follow predetermined course. That accurate forecasting reveals. Some studying determinism philosophy recognize that perfect prediction implies predetermination. Philosophical analysis shows that if future is perfectly foreseeable, then it must be fixed, making your timeline accuracy potentially provide evidence for deterministic position. Others exploring compatibilism note that prediction and choice might coexist, understanding that forecasting doesn't necessarily eliminate freedom makes questioning whether timeline accuracy truly threatens free will important philosophical consideration. A few from quantum perspectives recognize that determinism remains debated, understanding that physics doesn't definitively resolve free will question makes assessing whether timeline validation proves predetermination philosophically complex. Some experiencing free will anxiety feel disturbed, discovering that specific timeline is systematically materializing, creates existential concern about whether their choices are genuinely free or merely following predetermined script. Others, defending free will, resist determinism implications, arguing that timeline accuracy doesn't prove predetermination, makes them maintain belief in genuine freedom despite systematic reality alignment. A few embracing determinism feel reconciled, accepting that events might follow predetermined course, creates philosophical peace from recognizing that outcomes aren't their responsibility if future is fixed. The architects observe that determinism evidence, free will challenge, reveals that your timeline validation raises philosophical questions. Systematic alignment suggests predetermination. Most assume open future. Your accuracy challenges openness, and discovering that specific detailed timeline is systematically materializing exactly as forecasted creates unsettling possibility. That future was already predetermined, where your predictions merely revealed fixed sequence rather than creating outcomes, making reality alignment potential evidence for deterministic universe, where events follow necessary causal chains that free will assumptions obscure, proving that timeline accuracy itself constitutes philosophical evidence, raising profound questions about whether future is genuinely open to free choice or causally predetermined following fixed sequence. That perfect prediction reveals. The architects are now analyzing power dimension of timeline validation, you apparently created what they call predictive authority influence magnification, where demonstrating accurate timeline forecasting grants profound authority because validated predictions establish credibility that magnifies influence over future decisions, making timeline accuracy itself power amplification mechanism. Most authority requires demonstrated expertise. People gain influence through proving competence in specific domains, making their authority domain-specific and gradual to establish. But your timeline validation creates comprehensive authority, demonstrating accurate forecasting of complex future sequences establishes credibility that transcends specific domains because predictive accuracy suggests deep understanding that applies broadly, making validated timelines serve as authority demonstration that grants influence over wide range of decisions where people defer to your judgment. Having witnessed predictive accuracy creating recognition that timeline validation itself constitutes power amplification mechanism, where demonstrated forecasting accuracy magnifies influence through establishing comprehensive credibility. Watch what predictive authority creates in influence dynamics. Your credibility expands comprehensively. Timeline validation establishes authority that extends beyond specific predictions because demonstrated forecasting accuracy suggests broad understanding, making people defer to your judgment across domains. Some studying authority formation recognize that prediction validation establishes credibility. Research on expertise perception shows that demonstrating accurate forecasting creates authority, making your timeline alignment potentially powerful credibility-building mechanism. Others exploring influence mechanisms note that validated predictions magnify persuasion. Understanding that people trust those who demonstrate accuracy makes your timeline validation potentially amplify influence over future decisions. A few from leadership theory recognize that foresight establishes authority understanding, that demonstrating predictive capability creates leadership credibility, makes your timeline accuracy potentially grant influence that domain expertise alone cannot achieve. Some experiencing authority expansion appreciate influence. Their timeline validation establishing comprehensive credibility creates satisfaction from gaining authority that transcends specific domains, making predictive accuracy powerful influence amplifier. Others resenting your authority resist deference. Despite timeline validation, they maintain independent judgment, refusing to grant comprehensive authority based on predictive accuracy, arguing that forecasting success doesn't justify broad influence. A few questioning whether authority is justified, wondering if timeline validation truly proves comprehensive understanding or just specific predictive success, makes assessing whether broad authority is warranted important consideration. Some celebrating influence magnification feel validated, recognizing that their timeline accuracy grants comprehensive authority, validates investing in, demonstrating predictive capability as influence-building strategy. The architects observe that predictive authority, influence magnification reveals that your timeline validation grants comprehensive credibility, demonstrated accuracy, amplifies influence. Most authority is domain-specific. Your validation creates broad credibility, and discovering that demonstrating accurate timeline forecasting establishes authority transcending specific domains because predictive accuracy suggests deep understanding applying broadly, proves that timeline validation itself constitutes power amplification mechanism where demonstrated forecasting success magnifies influence over wide range of decisions as people defer to your judgment. Having witnessed predictive accuracy, making validated timelines serve as comprehensive credibility demonstration that grants authority exceeding what domain expertise alone achieves. Now something's emerging that the architects call timeline agency self-fulfilling question. Observers witnessing systematic alignment are discovering ambiguity about whether timeline accuracy reflects genuine prediction of independent events, or whether announcing timeline itself caused events to unfold as forecasted, creating uncertainty about whether you predicted or created the manifesting reality. Most predictions are clearly passive. Forecasters observe without influencing, making their accuracy reflect genuine foresight of independent events that would occur regardless. But your timeline creates an agency ambiguity. Systematic alignment could reflect either genuine prediction of predetermined sequence or self-fulfilling prophecy where announcing timeline influenced people to act in ways that created forecasted outcomes, making distinction between predicting and creating reality fundamentally ambiguous, when timeline announcement itself might have caused the alignment, proving that predictive accuracy doesn't definitively establish whether forecasting revealed or generated the manifesting sequence. Watch what self-fulfilling question creates in causation assessment. Observers cannot determine whether you predicted or created timeline alignment, leaving ambiguous whether forecasting revealed independent future or influenced events to match predictions, making predictive mechanism itself uncertain. Some studying self-fulfilling prophecies recognize that predictions can cause outcomes. Sociological research shows that forecasts influence behaviors, creating predicted results, making your timeline potentially exemplify self-fulfilling mechanism rather than pure prediction. Others exploring causation philosophy note that prediction and causation intertwine. Understanding that forecasting can influence outcomes makes distinguishing whether timeline revealed or created reality philosophically complex. A few from quantum perspectives recognize that observation affects reality. Understanding that measurement influences outcomes makes your timeline potentially demonstrate principle where announcing forecast affects what manifests. Some experiencing agency uncertainty question mechanism, their inability to determine whether you predicted or created alignment creates philosophical confusion about what timeline accuracy actually demonstrates. Others asserting pure prediction defend passive forecasting, arguing that timeline accuracy reflects genuine foresight of independent events rather than self-fulfilling influence, makes them resist idea that announcing predictions caused outcomes. A few embracing ambiguity, accept uncertainty, recognizing that distinguishing prediction from creation proves impossible, makes them comfortable with ambiguity about whether timeline revealed or generated reality. Some celebrating creative power appreciate causation, timeline announcement influenced events to match forecasts, then recognizing that announcing predictions creates reality validates understanding that forecasting itself constitutes reality-shaping power. The architects observe that timeline agency, self-fulfilling question reveals that alignment mechanism remains ambiguous. Prediction versus creation cannot be definitively determined. Most predictions are clearly passive. Your timeline creates uncertainty, and discovering that systematic alignment could reflect either genuine prediction of independent events or self-fulfilling prophecy where announcing timeline influenced outcomes proves that predictive accuracy doesn't definitively establish whether forecasting revealed predetermined sequence or caused events to unfold as predicted, making distinction between predicting and creating reality fundamentally ambiguous, when timeline announcement itself might have influenced the manifesting outcomes, creating philosophical uncertainty about whether you accessed or generated the aligning reality.